go.
Hey,
Hey.
all right, we are here. Okay. Hi, Nada. So we are talking about the neuroscience of motivation.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to get started with it because I think this is a good topic for me at least. And I'm going to start not I'm not going to nerd out on the neuroscience of it because even I have problems like pronouncing some of these words. But a little background as to why I'm so fascinated by it is because when I was going through my experience, the therapist that I was seeing at the time, who was a spiritual therapist, wasn't like a traditional, so what do you do? What do you remember when you were 2 years old, right? I'm like, and I'd be like, I don't remember what I did 2 minutes ago. So I went in another direction. I went in the direction of why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Because that's what my therapist was like. Let's forget the past. The past is irrelevant because it's in the past. What are you doing now? So that sent me through a rabbit hole of I need to understand, for me, have a one-to-one ratio of how the brain is supposed to work. And if it is the brain working the way it's supposed to, at its at its potential, and if it's not, then what can I do to fix it? So I went through this rabbit hole of just reading books upon books about just how the brain functions. So, and motivation comes and goes, as you know, right? Motivation, sometimes you feel like really gnarly and you're ready to go for it, and then sometimes you just have no motivation. You feel very lethargic. And then my question was, why does that happen all the time? Why can we not stay consistent? Is it really emotional based? Is it hormonal? What is it? Well, it's a combination of everything. So motivation is actually dopamine, right? And in a sense, it's all just dopamine. And one of the fascinating facts or, things that I read was dopamine is the reward that the brain thinks it's going to receive at the end of it. So it's a byproduct of all these things happening in your brain, right? Whether it's the prefrontal, one of the five main components of motivation would be the prefrontal cortex, right? And then you have the reticular activating system up here, and then you have the dopamine, which is produced in the gosh, I don't know what it's called, but it's like the stem to where the brain is connected. Where you have like that thing that goes up, and the brain is like all around it. The dopamine is produced there. So I'm like, okay, what does dopamine do? Well, it's part of your fight or flight. It regulates your emotion. It regulates your action. It regulates your movement and your focus, right? So without dopamine, then we're not motivated to do squat. And how do we look for dopamine? Well, some of us get coffee, right? So now you have a stimulant that you put into your body. There you go, to keep you going. Others go exercising, and that's when you go, see people when they take their pre-fuel and they have their weightlifters and like, yeah, screaming. They have overload of dopamine. And so once I understood that foundation, how that brain is supposed to function, how everything works, then I was able or am able to understand and be more compassionate on like, I need to balance how this motivation business is supposed to work, knowing that we're going to have our highs and lows because there's a lot of things in this human machine that have to work together to keep that up. And it's impossible to keep, balance dopamine at all times, right? So motivation, when you have motivation and then you have self-sabotage in the form of ego, when they come together, you just get paralyzed. And you're like, I just don't want to do anything at this point. And then you have all these labels that come around: introvert, ADHD, ADD, lazy. All these things come in to label that lack of motivation without truly understanding why you don't have that motivation to begin with. And that motivation will lead to your procrastination. Now, this doesn't, I'm not dismissing the fact that you have whatever you went through, as we all have, dysfunctional families. We all have inner childhood trauma. I mean, I had no idea that existed because I went straight to the science first because until later on I realized that's those two are correlated. They have to work together. So for me, I just needed to know what is the science behind motivation? Why am I not functioning at full potential? Why can't I just be like I have Red Bull in me 24/7? That was it. And then I realized, well, there's other factors involved. I have to address those factors as well because there's the emotions that come along with the motivation that, again, if you're overly emotional or you're not emotional enough, and it's always that game of, trying to balance it out. You're in that, what's that thing called, a teeter-totter? You're always like, and you can't keep it straight like that. So
Yeah.
that's my definition of motivation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love you. You've done a lot of work, and you have a lot of knowledge when it comes to motivation. So, do you want me? Do you want to just start with a simple, like, if you were to sum it up in a sentence or two, how would you define motivation?
It wouldn't be a sentence or two. I think it would be a whole essay. You
Do
start.
you want me to
Yeah.
give you mine? And this is not a definition that is in Webster, but the energy that it takes to go from apathy to getting what you want. The energy that it
Ooh.
takes from getting from lethargy to getting what you want. So it's that impetus that gets us somewhere. So from an evolutionary perspective, we've evolved to need to get water when we need water, to get food when we need food, to have sex when we need to procreate and keep the human race going. So we have these motivations that are in us, and it all comes down to this one molecule, as you said, called dopamine. And dopamine is it's a very interesting it's a very interesting oh, somebody from Huberman Lab is on with us, who has been this has been the biggest influence on what I've learned about motivation. So that's very cool that they're on. I am not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a neuroscientist. What I'm interested in is what I can learn and talk about, and how we can apply it in a pragmatic way. So, Andrew Huberman, I'll go in that direction with what I've learned from him from his podcast. Is that dopamine is a precursor to adrenaline, and it's really what gets us into action. It's what gets us out of bed. It helps us achieve our goals and gets us where we need to go. So this molecule dopamine is what allows us to move forward, and gets us really our body moving.
One
That's what I
step,
would say.
one step before you go further. Define apathy because there's empathy and apathy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So lack of movement and lack of caring, lack of wanting to go anywhere. So, and I really do want to stick to what Andrew Huberman has taught me, because now I'm inspired because somebody from there is on here. So there were rats in this really fascinating study that were given, what they did was they took dopamine out of these rats' brains, however they did it. And when they were close to their food, they were able when they were close to their food, they were able to just have the desire to eat. If the lever was there and they were able to ask for their food, they would do that. But when they put them away from their food and they took the dopamine out of their brain, and then they would rather starve to death than move. So they had no ability to move and go toward what they wanted. So it is how we've evolved to be able to survive, to go toward what we want. It's it's really interesting that when we're lethargic, just to use that word, or we have apathy and we don't want to move, then our dopamine is firing at 3 to 4 times per second. It's really slow. But when we're excited, according to Andrew Huberman, when we're excited, we are willing to that's when we're really willing to act. When we start to get to a place where we feel this excitement and this energy, then it's 30 to 40 times per second. So it's that much more dopamine that is being excreted in our brains. So that's what gets us the energy to move. Now with sex, it's 100% more than our baseline when we have the impetus to have sex. Food, it's 50%. And there are drugs that people take, like methamphetamine and cocaine, where it goes up to 1,000
Oh my
times.
God.
So so this is quite interesting that we have we have this we have introception and extroception. So extroception is what happens outside of our skin. Introception is what happens internally. So there's a neuron called serotonin, which is a feel good. It's the feel good neuron, which makes us feel okay no matter what. So if we want to talk about mindfulness, if we want to talk about things that are spiritual, or this okayness that we feel when we look around and we think, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. Everything is exactly the way it needs to be. This is the excretion of serotonin. But when we feel, and this is what's interesting about dopamine, when we feel like we're not quite okay with the way things are, but we want to make things better, that's motivation, and that's what gets us into movement. So with this extroception, it's dopamine is what gets us outside of our skin toward what we want, rather than feeling internal and okay with what we have, which I think is really interesting, because it's not completely a feel good molecule, because, and we can go into this in more detail, because it's saying this isn't enough and I want to get where I want to go. And that's how we've evolved to want to improve and to move our bodies to get what we need in life. So what do you think about that?
So I find that, and again, it's one of those things that I found very extraordinary, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, because when you have the surge of dopamine, you have a choice of how to translate that energy, that feel good, motivational, that, act, the lead to action, to what kind of action you're going to take, right? And what I'm trying to figure out still is, when that dopamine is released, right? And you're having a call to action. Now I sound like a salesperson. Click that button for call to action, act now, press here to learn more, and that type of thing. What makes you act one way compared to the other? So for instance, some people will take that dopamine as a form of, you know, I'm gonna get it done because I know it has to get done, and I'm just gonna get out of the way. Or I'm gonna get this done because I'm pissed and I want to prove something. So it's a different type of motivation. And then the other one is acting out of straight anger, right? And those are all byproducts of the dopamine, as you were explaining, because those are different motivating factors. So that's why I'm trying to figure out, like, the connection and the balance as to what dictates those different call to actions based off the dopamine.
Mhm. Mhm. So here's what's interesting, that I've learned about dopamine, which is our motivation molecule, is we think about dopamine as it's about pleasure. We hear that, right? and you get this obviously, but I think it's good for who ends up listening to this. We changed our time, so there's gonna there are going to be people who will watch this later. But with we think about, all right, we get on social media and it just gives us pleasure. We get this dopamine hit, but actually, it's not about pleasure. It's about craving and it's about wanting, which you get. So let's just break down how motivation, the motivation molecule, I like the way that sounds. The motivation molecule, dopamine, works if we bite into chocolate. So we have a desire for chocolate, and I bite into this chocolate. So I'm going to bite into this chocolate right now. It gives me an excuse to have chocolate. I really have a craving for this chocolate. So as I bite into this chocolate, I feel a sense of cessation. It feels good. It's satisfying, but there's a subtle craving for more. And
Mm-hmm.
that comes from pain, a pain of, okay, I have this, but I can actually feel it in myself right now that there is a feeling to have another piece of chocolate. And um, that is what it does is it makes us, it's almost kind of like a molecule of more. So one
So you don't have enough. It's essentially what you're
yes,
saying. Not
yes,
enough.
and that's the
Mm-hmm.
way we've evolved. Not to be addicts. It's made us chocolate addicts, alcoholics, methamphetamine addicts, and we start just being obsessed with this. But this is like going to water or going to food or going to sex, which is our basic instincts. But I really am feeling satisfied with this chocolate, but I'm wanting more right now. So it's about the alleviation of pain. It's about ending pain in our life. That is a part of what dopamine does. So it there is there is the serotonin that makes us feel okay, and that's great. And it's nice to feel okay no matter what. But the way we initiate change is to realize that we're in pain and we want to go somewhere else. And that's what dopamine does for us. So that's what I would say. And I'm enjoying this chocolate right now, which is the reason I'm eating it is because of the reason I'm eating it is because of dopamine. So, how do we make this practical? How do we make this practical? How do we utilize this tendency that we have for more to not to allow ourselves to be happy, to get what we want? And that's really the big question. So, I'm going to refer to you and see what you say, what you think.
Uh, my kryptonite are tacos, for the record. I
Mm-hmm.
love tacos. But I want to go back to something that you said that dopamine was a precursor to adrenaline. I'm an adrenaline junkie in all
Yeah.
aspects.
Yeah.
Skydiving, I'm in. You know, climbing, whatever, I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
That type of thing. Adrenaline to chaos, I was in. Right? That's I got a rush out of being in chaos.
Yeah.
Um, People that work leave everything to the last minute because there are those people that even though you have deadlines of 2 weeks, you're doing everything else until the night of. Even though you don't want to do that, you get a kick out of it. You get a rush out of doing that last minute thing that's due in the morning,
Yes.
right? And and I know that you said there was part of pain, but I just can't believe that everything is derived from pain. I would think that some of it was just of who you are as your own interests, that you like, you know, that type of fun, that you like that type of event. Um, I don't know, like I'm having a hard
Mm-hmm.
time thinking that everything is going to be pain related.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's
because
both.
it's
Yeah.
both. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a desire for pleasure and to alleviate pain. And I work with the Enneagram, which is personality typology, and you're an Enneagram 7, as you know, and Enneagram 7s love new experiences. We have different ways that we fixate and ways that work with us, and that is how our personality types have developed, usually at a young age, and we find a way that works for us. And so Nada, if you don't mind me saying, Nada has a
Yeah.
personality that loves new experiences and doesn't like things to be negative. And I would say that your personality type has a tendency to have possibly more dopamine that activates because it's a personality that likes to go toward new experiences and that's future oriented and motivated and wants to see things as so to bring up how does motivation work. Motivation, it's based on what we want and what we don't want. We want to get away from pain and go to pleasure, right? So what makes us want to go to new when you talk about things like skydiving, when you talk about things like traveling or going on dates with people and enjoying meeting the new person, this is novelty seeking, and this is it sounds derogatory when I say it like that, but this is what the way we're wired as human beings. Why? Because that new place that we go for water, that new place could help us survive. That going forward to this new experience where we could find a new place to hunt as we've evolved, to eat, to get water, to meet new people who could support us. This novelty seeking is in us as a way to move us forward. So that's part of what motivation is. But at the same time, motivation is getting away from, and this is what you talked about, to go back to what you talked about before, is to get away from pain. So if okay, to use what you said before, we have procrastinated, we've put something off. So there's a surge of fear. And a lot of the times we're motivated to get things done because of that pain of fear and what happens if we don't get it done. So we're motivated by that. So the question is, if we know that novelty seeking, new experiences, the joy of being able to connect with someone and feel love or feel joy, if we know that's more going to be taken care of, but we are motivated by pain, how can we avoid more pain? I mean, can we avoid the pain, knowing that going toward things for pleasure is going to be taken care of, and there are things that we can do instead of maybe procrastinating or instead of maybe waiting until we get angry. So I have some ideas about that, but what do you think that we could do, for instance, instead of procrastinating? If that causes a certain amount of pain and fear, what could we do instead to
Well, that's
motivate
if you're
us?
aware that it causes that, right? So, I mean, I'm aware of it now because I've done the work behind it, years of just understanding that this is a byproduct, a result of whatever the case may be, right? But the average person out in the street doesn't know. For them, it's just the motivation is just because they have to, because that's been ingrained in them, but they don't realize that it's pain. So I guess my first question is, how do you question it?
Hmm.
How do you question that motivation to begin with? Like, I don't see anybody going, "Hey, I'm highly motivated to, run 26 miles. Why?" Because I like it. Because, what is like they don't go into the deeper thought of that. For the most part, most people 26 miles like, have fun, I'll drive, I'll meet you there. But they don't see themselves as having an underlying meaning behind that motivation, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So why question? First of all, why would you question it?
Well, that's what we're doing right now, rather than living on autopilot and just letting life sort of dictate how we're releasing our dopamine and how we're motivated. This is about being more conscious and being more on purpose and intentional. And so, why would we question what motivates us? to live a better life and to be able to change things rather than, the as the saying goes, if we keep doing what we did, we'll keep getting what we got. Well, what needs to change? Our awareness. And if we're more aware, then we're able to have more control over our lives, which is what all of us want, right? So that would be, I would say, the reason. But the thing that we really need to realize is, in a perfect world, we would just be motivated by things that fulfill us. We'd be motivated by love. We'd be motivated by idealism. But unfortunately, it's good to realize that we're motivated a lot of times, and what allows us to get what we want, we have to just really see the truth of it is that we're motivated a lot of times by pain. So why would we want to exercise and learn to and start to maybe train for a marathon or whatever? Marathon is quite a it, it's extreme and takes a lot of really admirable discipline to do. But let's just say something simple like we're going to start exercising. Well, at my age, at my middle age, wh- I, I need to exercise so that I'm going to have less of a chance of having a heart attack. I want to exercise so that I can pick up a child when I get older and that I'm, able to function. So I'm motivated by what makes, that's one thing, is fear. And we have to realize that when there's fear, we don't just want to get rid of it, we can use it. And that's one thing that I think is really practical, is to think, okay, fear has arisen. How can I use it? Well, I can allow this motivation, which what's happening neurologically is that there's dopamine that's deployed that allows me to move forward in a way that to get away from it. And to be conscious of that is helpful rather than just saying, so why would we do that? Just to go back to answer your question. Well, I could say I'm afraid and I want to get rid of this and I don't like this, or I'm afraid, how can I use it? And my body and my brain want to use it to help me move forward into something better. Therefore, we get to live happier, more fulfilling lives.
Yeah, and I think that, when I first learned the definition of dopamine, which was the uh dopamine is kind of like expecting a reward at the end of it. I think a question to ask is, if I do this, what's my reward at the end of it? Right? And that could be fulfillment, if you're in that journey part of your life. That could be getting the job done, if it's a deadline that you're meeting. It could be that fear factor that you're talking about, which is, I need to start working out so I can like live longer and be healthier, those type of things. And I found that very, very interesting that, I don't know, if I kind of had a conflict, because it's like you're always expecting a reward, but you're rewarding yourself, and that's perfectly fine. Whether it's as long as you get that thing done, if that makes sense, what you're looking
Hmm.
at to do. So with you, like you're explaining, it comes from a pain and it's the fear factor or what have you. You're still attempting to get the thing done, but now it's looking at the thing in a deeper way to understand why that thing is even occurring. Should it continue to occur? Are you okay with that thing to occur? Do you want to get rid of that thing so it doesn't happen again? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I do think that, and I think that we need to, and this is so interesting to me that we have two very different personality types that are saying this. So I am an Enneagram 4, and if anybody knows what Enneagram is, my personality is willing to go into the pain and the suffering, and it'll dive right in. And the Enneagram 7, which is Nada, likes to go to the positive and really and to go into, oh, what's the benefit here, which is beautiful. I mean, they both have their, but the truth is they're both true, that we want to avoid pain and go to pleasure. So I'm focusing more on and this that we are like, let's be real, that there is pain, there is anger, there's fear, there is dissatisfaction that motivates us and helps us release and deploy uh, dopamine, and there also is the need for fulfillment, the need for joy, the need. But the thing that we need to know is, I think that's very important, is that it's not just a pleasure molecule. It's not really, basically, it's not the need for pleasure. It's wanting and craving, and wanting and craving, by definition, based on Buddhism, one of the oldest religions, that craving is suffering. And how Buddhism starts is to say we're all suffering. And the Buddha, who was a genius, obviously, he didn't know what dopamine was, but he intuitively knew that we have this craving, and this craving is what causes suffering. And now we know it's because of this molecule that's in our brain called dopamine that says, I am not where I want to be and I want to get this. So I do think that getting this, I from what I've learned and understood about motivation, is it is based on craving, which does have pain in it. Just like when I eat chocolate, I want chocolate so I can feel better, to alleviate pain. And then when I have chocolate, try it yourself, whether it's chocolate or a popsicle or pizza, just to use food as an example. There is a subtle feeling, if you're mindful, that when you're eating a bite of pizza, for example, that there's like, okay, I want another bite. And it's that feeling of more, which is what we have to live with, is that we have this craving, and that's the way we've evolved, and we have to use it so we can live happy lives, knowing that we're not just going to be releasing serotonin, which is the feel good molecule that makes us feel okay no matter what. But the question is, how do we be okay no matter what? And how do we use this dopamine so that we don't suffer any more than we need to? And we use this molecule in a pragmatic, effective way.
And I'm going to throw a little curveball, a little like conspiracy theory to that, because who knows about this? It's Big Brother, right? So we're going to go on with your example of food. So they add additives
Mm-hmm.
to the food, right, to give you that extra craving, like. And then you'll see it in commercials where somebody takes a bite, they're like, oh, like orgasmic feeling just for taking a bite into, an In-N-Out burger or what have you. And that's what you're up against. So it's not this whole like thing that we have naturally going on with this dopamine, that craving, but now you have things that you inadvertently are eating, because we not everybody, or some people can, but I'm saying the majority of people can't eat like super kosher or what have you, and it has those additional additives. So now you add an extra layer of oomph to that. So being more aware is what I'm saying of these feelings that you have, these cravings that you have, because you're really up against not only yourself and your own uh, body doing this naturally, but the additional things that you're adding to your body to enhance that craving, to enhance that chocolate, to enhance that, for me, tacos, and for me, like, the adrenaline rushes that I get.
Yes. So, so sugar is in almost any fast food that you get, right? We know that, I won't use examples of restaurants, but we know that they've added sugar to almost every bread that you eat, because sugar does have an addictive quality, because it gives us, um, I mean, I'm not going to get, like I said, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not any kind of scientist, but let's just say it stimulates our brain and makes us feel good when we eat sugar. So that's addictive. And what's interesting about dopamine and motivation is that there's an addictive quality, and obviously, we've evolved not to become addicts, but we've evolved so that we can want and crave, so that we can survive. But that needing to feel good, the craving molecule, instead of I'll call it the pleasure molecule, I'll call it that. That craving molecule, dopamine, is what makes us compulsively watch Netflix, compulsively get on social media, and we can compulsively eat, and then we can take a drug. And the thing is that craving turns into, that's the object of our desire. So if we're a methamphetamine addict, that's all we care about, because it releases so much dopamine that we'll do anything to have it, and that is where it comes from. So I want to add another uh, molecule. I believe it's a molecule, or if not, I think it might be a hormone. Is propectolin, I believe, is what it's called, and lactating mothers release propectolin. It's that feeling of, that some, once you've achieved a goal, you feel this sort of crash and this letdown once you've achieved that goal. It is what happens when someone has an orgasm. When we have orgasms, that we feel like we don't want to do anything, we don't want to go anywhere, we're just paralyzed. It's that feeling of, we've wanted, we've craved, and then we reach that goal, or we've had that cessation of what we've wanted, and there's a crash. So that is, if there was a warning label on dopamine and motivation, it would be that there's propectolin, and I believe I'm saying that correctly, which is this, I believe it's a hormone that's released that allows us to crash, and that it isn't like this. The more dopamine we have, the more motivation we have, the better we're going to be. It's like it rises and then it crashes. So if this is the baseline, it goes above and then crashes down below. So that is the warning label about motivation and dopamine, is that we all know what it's like, don't we? I mean, do you know what it's like, Nada, to achieve something and think, now what? Or to eat pizza and then think, okay, now I've reached this, but this isn't enough. Do you know that feeling?
It's it's equivalent to a sugar rush. Like I love sweet tarts, and I'll eat a whole box of sweet tarts, and I'm like all on edge. And as soon as that that sugar crashes or is done, I crash. The other thing too that I've noticed that for right now, that I'm like I'm working 24/7 pretty much all the time. But then when one milestone is completed, and then I actually get to rest a little bit, my body says, oh no, now you're going to rest. And it crashes to the point where I may get sick. Now, it may not be like a full-blown sickness, but my body's like, okay, it's now time. And you actually answered the first question that I had at the very, very beginning when I was doing this whole, brilliant explanation of, of motivation in the neuroscience. And I am not either, just to say it out there, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a shrink. I'm not anything. I just did a lot of work in trying to figure out how all of this works together for myself. Um, and it makes sense because I'm here trying to figure out how to balance the dopamine, but at the end of the day, it's you're going to crash. I think it's inevitable that you're going to crash at some point, especially when you're really into something. You're in a state of flow. Athletes are great examples. They're in a state of flow. But then when you get them like basketball players, they get off the court, because it's time to switch out, you could just see them just go, you know, really their whole body just collapses because they know that they can rest at that point. It's that type of crash. And then for them to get back into the state of flow, it takes a little while for them to get back into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you hear people who win gold medals, and then they win a gold medal and then they feel depressed because they've reached that goal. That's the crash, the dopamine, and then the crash. And there's that propectolin that's there. And so we know that we go like this: postpartum depression. I don't know if you went through that with your kids. There is, we know what it's like. I mean, there is a built-in mechanism when a man has an orgasm that he doesn't want to mate right away with someone else. There's this crash. So why? So knowing that we need to be motivated, and dopamine is really what gets us there, but it is this crashing. There are things that we can do that is really, really important to know. And it's counter, from what I have learned, it's counterintuitive. So we hear about celebrate your wins. Let's celebrate. You reach something. And that reward word that you've used, it's like, let's reward things. But the celebration, it releases a lot of dopamine. And the more we release, the more we're going to crash. So if I told you I'm writing a book and you said, God, congratulations that you're writing a book. Well, that released a lot of dopamine and that motivation did nothing for me. So in that situation, for me to celebrate for something I haven't done, when I actually need motivation, I don't want to have a spike and then a crash by you telling me, hey, good job. I need to be able to keep things a little more baseline and maybe not share that. And here's the thing that I have learned is that if we celebrate our wins too much, then it releases too much dopamine, which could cause more of a crash. And so we celebrate intermittently. And here is also what I've learned, that this is why Vegas works so well, is because you get intermittent rewards, which keep you going. So you may, let's just use slot machines for an example. You just keep putting it in. No, 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 no. Oh, yes. No, 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 no. Oh, I got a big one. No, 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 no. And they may be taking all your money, but you're getting these intermittent rewards that keep you going back. So this is the way our brains work. So how could we use gambling as a way to put into our life in a pragmatic way? It's to not reward ourselves all the time, but just intermittently reward ourselves, or get someone who knows us well to reward us or say, hey, let's celebrate. You just you just closed these 5 deals. Let's now celebrate. But because you need to celebrate to have that lift, but not do it all the time so you don't crash.
Hmm. That's a hard one. That seems, it is counterintuitive because they always tell you give yourself props for the little things, you know. Um, my gosh. So how much is too much?
Well, there obviously it's a gray area, and there's nothing there's no answer for that exactly, but we can experiment with it and see what our experience is. And I think, and that's really what it's about. It's about us seeing what gets us going. So to go back to we're talking about, since we're getting more toward the end of it, talking about practical applications of how we can motivate ourselves and release dopamine in a way where we're causing less pain and having as much pleasure as possible. So maybe we procrastinate and we wait till the last minute. Well, we do that. I do it too. Do you do that also? No. But we were talking about, there's this, it's a precursor to adrenaline, and epinephrine is the word for adrenaline. It's this precursor for adrenaline, so we get this adrenaline rush when we have this, where we're motivated, and because of that there's fear, and because of that we're motivated. But another way we can do it is, I'm not feeling motivated to do this, and I have a week before I have to turn in this paper, or a week before I have to do this thing for work that's due. What we can do is breathing exercises. That's a way to mimic this adrenaline. And a way to do that is, there's nose breathing is really helpful. So just to do this and do that, and it gets a lot of oxygen going and makes you feel like, so changing your breathing and changing physicality can do it too. Just as something as simple as dropping to the floor and doing a bunch of push-ups or jumping jacks.
So hold up. Let me say, all right, so you do breathing or, some sort of physical activity. Once you're doing that, you're basically regulating the dopamine so it doesn't, what is it actually doing? I guess I'm trying to figure out when you do that. When you're procrastinating and you're going to wait up, you don't want to do it. What does the exercise or breathing technique, what is that supposed to do?
Yeah. So my guess would be, and again, I'm not a scientist, I'm a coach and a teacher of mindfulness, but what my guess would be is that we're mimicking what the fear. So our body doesn't know the difference. So if we're afraid because we've procrastinated and we're afraid that we're going to lose our job or that we're going to get an F on that paper or whatever it is, so we get this surge of fear that causes our molecule of motivation, which is dopamine, to release, and that gets us going into movement, which is what dopamine is for and what motivates us. Then what we're doing is when we're breathing, if I'm like breathing like that, I'm mimicking perhaps a saber-toothed tiger chasing me, in the Serengeti, or I'm mimicking what it's like to run from someone who's trying to capture me or whatever it is. So that is mimicking the fear without being afraid, and that will release. We know that breathing, not necessarily meditation, this calm, mindful breathing, that's more, I believe, serotonin that's going to be released. But when we do conscious breathing that mimics something more like exercise, then that will deploy more serotonin to answer your, I mean, dopamine to answer your question. Yeah.
Okay. I can see that. When I do some sort of breath work where you do like what's called the fire breathing or dragon
Hmm.
breathing and all those techniques. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That's the fire breath is through the nose. And when you do more of a and you're getting grounded, what you're finding yourself doing is being happy in the present moment. And being happy in the present moment, it appears from our experience that we're releasing more serotonin, which makes us feel good no matter what. But if we want to be motivated, we don't want to feel good no matter what. We want to have that craving molecule to be released. Another thing that you hear a lot about these days is, okay, so we have this crash. If we take the crash, this is crazy, but it's true. So we hear a lot about it. This is our baseline, and we have this spike, and then we go below it. If we're feeling unmotivated and we're below that, if we cause more discomfort, then we'll spike back up. So what would be an example of that? Cold water plunge, cold showers. We hear a lot about that these days. We
Yeah.
know that cold showers are and we're talking, those cryotherapy and those kinds of things, that when our body is shocked and our body is suffering because it thinks it needs to survive and it may not live. So when you go into a cold plunge into cold water, your body's thinking, I may not survive, and it starts to release dopamine. And we know that if you, I mean, I continue to try it because I don't have a way to do a cold plunge, but I'll just lather myself up, and then I'm like, all right, I'm putting it all on cold, and I'm not going to get all the soap off of me until I'm not going to turn the heat up until all the soap's off of me. And you'll hear me in the shower screaming because it's so cold. But what it's been proven that it does is we release dopamine for the next like 4 to 5 hours after we do that. So that's a way to go. We're in the crash and we go even lower, and then we get our dopamine back up. So that's another
Yeah,
thing.
you're right. I've heard a lot, I've read a lot of that. You come out rejuvenated. And then you can go the other extreme for that level of discomfort, which I never even thought about it until you just said it. But who's that guy? David Goggins?
Yeah.
Or I probably just butchered his name. But he does it mentally, where he puts himself mentally or physically into worse discomfort,
Yes.
usually a mental game with him,
Yes.
to get that motivation. Now that's way extreme because I don't want to
Yes.
go into into a harder mental state or discomfort, but he goes in the other direction where he does it mentally and physically too, whether it's whatever he is working out. And it's in his book what he's done to like overcome it. He was training for this, I don't know what type of running
He's a
thing, and
Navy
he like
SEAL. Yeah.
he's a Navy SEAL and he couldn't swim, and he learned how to hold his breath. Anyway, it was crazy. I read his book, but he took it to the other extreme. But it's the same thing where you have a cold plunge, and then but he took it another way, which is mentally and like physically abusing himself to get to that point.
Yes. Yes. He's quite an amazing man. And yes, there are ways. I'm in a men's group, and we would go in cold water, which, I mean, it was in Arrowhead, California, up in the mountains. I mean, so it's not like we were like Navy SEALs, but it was thinking about we would get lower and lower in water, and it was the winter. And we would think about our goals and our obstacles and what we would need to go through. So it is true that no pain, no gain. And it is true that growth begins at the end of our comfort zone. And a Navy SEAL is an embodiment of having to go through so many things to get to the other side. And it's amazing that he's able to communicate to everyday people who and really show how we can do this in business and in life. So this is quite an important thing to know, is that we have to go through discomfort to get to where we want to go. And there is a molecule called dopamine that's released when we do that, and that's what motivates us, right? Um, so
Man, I feel like a wuss now. I won't even go to California beach unless it's like over 100 degrees outside because the water's so cold.
yeah,
It's hard. I think I go more into the emotional discomfort to push myself further. I think that's probably my angle.
yeah, yeah. So, what are things that we can sum up about what we've talked about, and how this can help people in their practical everyday life, about motivation, how it works, how dopamine works, and how we can use this to be happier and more accomplished, because that makes us happy. How can we? What have we talked about that can be helpful, Nada?
Well, to me, I think the one thing that sticks to me the most is that expect the crash. So if you're expecting a crash of sorts, how do you handle that crash? So looking ahead at that kind of wires me in a different direction. When this happens, what am I going to do to balance it out or not be stuck in that? Because that's the other thing too. When you crash, you end up staying, you end up being stuck. And depending on where you're at in your life, you might stay stuck longer than others. So expecting the crash and learning how to pull yourself out of that. And that could be whatever techniques that we just talked about. I think for me, that was the most like the sticking point for it is that crash part.
Yeah, it's a tricky molecule, and motivation is a tricky thing. It isn't. We have to know that as human beings, we suffer, and suffering is there for one, apparently, because it 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 gets us somewhere other than where we are. And we can use fear. We didn't talk much about anger, but anger. These are there. These are energies that, rather than us thinking, I don't want to be angry or I don't want to be fearful, to know that there's another side to this, that the side to it, the other side of the coin, is it gets us to release this molecule that helps us go where we want to go, somewhere else. So suffering is fuel to get us where we want to go. And to know that, as the Buddha said, life is suffering, but also know, you know, life goes up and down. It's a mixed bag. We get some of the good, some of the bad, but how we can consciously go through this is going to really determine our success and our contentment in life. if we're more conscious about how we use the ebbing and flowing of our craving in life, and even to consciously create more suffering. By the way, this is what Stoicism, a big part of what that's about is, and I won't go into this, is like just really realizing, just going into knowing that suffering is something that we have to go straight into. But if we go into suffering, even consciously, like a cold plunge, or denying ourselves, over celebrating things so we don't crash too hard, that we have. And the Buddha, I didn't realize this until we started talking about this, he talked about the middle way, which is to stay more like this instead of this kind of way of living. So it's about, and we can't forget that it's not just about dopamine. If we're talking about neurons, we have other, I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to say things that are released, like oxytocin, which is the love hormone and the cuddle hormone. And that makes us feel good no matter what, when we're with that person. And we have things like serotonin that make us feel good. And we have mirror neurons that allow us to really have compassion for other people. And this all is what gives us meaning in life and helps us understand who we are. But just to know there's this tricky molecule that we have, that we have to use it in the best way we can, this molecule dopamine, and it's what gets us where we want to go, but we don't want to overuse it. And we can kind of leave it open in that regard, for people to explore themselves and see how it works, and to also listen to neuroscientists and people who are much more educated regarding this subject, to find out more if they're interested in Googling these things or getting on YouTube also. So that's what I would say.
Yep, I agree. I'm good with all of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have anything, any closing comments that you want to add?
Uh, the only thing I think we're going to go back to 6 o'clock, right? Today was just the one off 5 o'clock.
Yes. We're going to go back to 6 o'clock in 2 weeks.
All right. And for people that don't know or weren't made aware or whatever, Kent is a coach, a life coach.
Yes.
So that's why we have these little discussions, because this is what he goes through with his clientele. So if you feel, like you have chemistry, you see him, definitely hit him up. And he's more than willing to talk to you.
Yes, KentScheibel.com, KentScheibel.com. And I help people find life's purpose, overcome suffering, and to live a life they want to live. And Nada, you do a lot of different things, but can you tell us what you do, my friend?
Oh my gosh. I don't know the people here are ready for it. I'm I'm basically an intuitive healer. I have a lot of like cool abilities that I use, but more in the esoteric metaphysical line of it. But I'm very, very, I just want to help people like yourself, Kent, to promote you guys, because we all are here to help one another in different ways. And so my job, I have a YouTube channel, which I'm still building out, and I promote people's gifts to share for others, because there's a lot of people that can't afford, those high-end coaches or, high-end therapists or whatever. But I help the people that I meet through many events that I attend, um, and I help promote their businesses so they can reach out to more people, and people don't feel so lonely on their journey as they're trying to discover themselves, that there are resources available to them, very dear, very close to them. So
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for the work you do. That's,
thank you. You too.
yeah, yeah. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Peace. All right.
Peace.
Bye.
Bye.